very good evening and a warm welcome to Personal Finance. I'm Gugulethu Cele. Now tonight we speak to Eugene du Plessis, partner and head of tax at Grant Thornton Johannesburg. Now he's here to discuss the significant impact and potential changes to estate duty tax, especially after announcements made by the Davis Tax Commission. Good to have you with us today. Maybe paint a picture for us first. Many of us know the Davis Tax Committee. They're looking at particular amendments and changes that have come through. I understand an announcement was made which concerns you and those who might be affected by estate duty.
Sure. You know, the Davis Tax Committee has an overarching mandate that was set by the Minister of Finance to look at the South African tax legislation and in particular certain areas of it, including estate duty, to see if it contributes to the progressivity of the tax system in South Africa and helps to bridge inequality and all of that. So the purpose of this report was specifically at the role of estate duty in the South African tax legislation, coupled with the interaction with CGT, capital gains tax, and how that contributes or doesn't contribute to the overall tax collections in the country. So some of the main features that came out of the report was firstly the report looks at the inequality gap in South Africa, etc., and it paints a picture of that, and against that background the Davis Tax Committee then has certain recommendations. So they said that, you know, estate duties has a very low contribution to the overall tax collections, only 0.1% or R1 billion, which is very low.
Sure.
And in comparison to other countries or other tax systems, it's not really that far out, because other countries that have got specific wealth tax systems don't really collect much taxes from those wealth taxes in any case.
Just to pick your brain on that for a moment, why is that? Is it because people have become smarter in how they can avoid tax? Is it evasion, or is it just that the money's not there?
Yeah, it's difficult to say why other countries don't really collect much taxes, but I think it's just, maybe there are schemes in place to try and avoid the tax. That could be the one. Obviously, if you've got assets, you'd like to defer your taxes for as long as possible, so there are tax deferral schemes in place. I just think that, most people probably don't have assets, so whilst they might be contributing income tax over their lifespan, they don't necessarily have assets on death. It's only really the wealthy. So it's a small part of the population or of taxpayers that you're really catching in that net.
Yeah.
And in the South African context, there are certain tax planning mechanisms that one can use to defer or reduce your overall estate duty. So, if you've got the tax to pay and there's a loophole or scheme that you can make use of, people will make use of that scheme. It's just the way it is.
In my mind, I'm thinking trusts. Is there a particular relationship here?
Well, I think one must just be careful when you talk about trusts. That trusts have got a wide range of uses. It's not just tax planning or tax avoidance. The Davis Tax Committee report does mention that they don't like the use of trusts, that they feel that trusts have been used in ways that go around what the purpose of the tax legislation is or assists in reducing the overall tax collections. But, trusts can be used for many things in commercial transactions, but in the context of personal individuals, it's not just used for tax planning. As I said, it's a vehicle to assist in planning your estate. So the practical aspects of it, not just the tax. How do you provide for your family when you're not around? It's a protection mechanism for against creditors or other claims. So, yes, trusts are used in a tax planning context, but it's not its only use. So in the context of trusts, insofar as the Davis Tax Committee's report is concerned, they feel that the trusts are used to sort of circumvent taxes. For an example, in putting your assets into a trust, the growth on the assets is captured in the trust, not in your hands.
Yeah.
So in that way, your estate is effectively pegged at a certain value, and the growth is not subject to estate duty. You could also use the trust to award income or, as they call it, split income or capital gains between the beneficiaries and achieve an overall lower effective tax rate. So yes, it has uses that go against the spirit of the law in some respects, but what I find quite interesting is that, if you look at a lot of the provisions in the Income Tax Act, they actually allow or permit the use of trusts to divert or award income to different people. Now, if it makes provision for it and people use it, it's not really an evasion scheme. It's really just tax avoidance, and as we all know,
it's legal.
It is legal to avoid your taxes. There's nothing illegal about it. So I think that the problem with everything in life is that there's a small minority that might make use of it outside of the bounds that would be normally acceptable. And that's where the Davis Tax Committee has a problem. I think if you look at the measures, it's not just estate duty that they're focusing on, they're also focusing on the lifespan of the trust, the taxes that could be collected over the lifespan of the trust. In other words, if you put the assets into the trust, the growth is in the trust, the income and capital gains arise in the trust. If you then award that income to beneficiaries, you get a lower overall effective tax rate. Because the trust has the most penal tax rate at 41% income tax, a flat rate, and the highest capital gains tax rate at 26.7%. So if you can capture the tax within the trust and not in the hands of the beneficiaries, you can get an overall higher collection of taxes. And that's what the Davis Tax Committee is recommending, that you cannot pass income through the trust to the beneficiaries anymore, but that it should all be taxed within the trust. Now that in itself is not going to add estate duty to the fiscus's coffers, but what it is going to do on a collective basis is add income whilst the trust is in operation, a higher amount of tax to the coffers.
Having said that, though, for particular taxpayers who might be watching at home and have a trust in place or are beneficiaries of a particular trust or are still trying to go about their estate planning, are there particular tax brackets that this will affect more harshly and stringently than particular others?
Well, I think it's not so much that it's a specific tax bracket, but I mean, if you use that as a reference point, most people that use trusts are probably already in the most, the highest tax bracket, which is in any case 41% for individuals. So you'd probably find that it is the wealthier individual or wealthier family that has got a trust structure that would be most affected by this. So yes, but the measures would affect the people in the highest tax bracket, but it would also affect people in the lower tax bracket. And what I mean by that is, let's assume that you've set up a trust to cater for your family's needs. If you award the income to your kids, and assuming they don't have any other income, you could get that taxed at 0% in some cases, purely because they're below the tax threshold. If you tax the income within the trust, it just means that there's a lower net amount that you can use for the benefit of the beneficiaries.
Yeah.
So in that way, you are affecting people that are in a lower tax bracket, but it's not necessarily a tax bracket issue. It's just, if you look at the overall impact on the trust. The trust aspect is one aspect. The other issues obviously are estate duty specific. Currently when you, in most wills, a provision is made for the assets to roll over to the surviving spouse. That currently is completely exempt from estate duty. So the assets that go to your spouse don't attract estate duty. They feel that there's no justification, and they even refer to the Constitution to say that it might be against the Constitution to make such a distinction. But so if you take that away, it means that if you've planned to leave your assets for your spouse, you might need to relook at that now, because if it might be subject to certain thresholds. We don't know yet what the limitations will be, or it might fall away completely. We don't know. The recommendation is that it at least be subject to a threshold if it's not completely taken away. So that's one area of concern, because how do you then cater for your family's needs if you don't have that mechanism anymore? And if you think about it, if you have to pay the estate duty on, for example, shares, let's assume it was shares in a company or the property, how do you fund that? So now you have to sell assets probably sooner than you would otherwise have had to fund the tax.
Yeah.
So the planning around how you fund then potential estate duty going forward is going to be quite topical.
Sure.
And a lot of people would have to relook at their wills going forward to understand how that impacts on them.
Is there something that for those who are watching tonight that they need to take into consideration in their next meeting with their financial planners?
Well, bear in mind, these are recommendations. If you look at the previous commissions that we've got, the CATS Commission, the Margot Commission, they've made numerous recommendations, but not all of them have been implemented. So it's quite difficult to make calls on what to do at this point in time. The public still has until the end of September to comment on these recommendations, and then it might take some time before it reaches legislation in whatever form it might come through in. So it's difficult to make decisions at this point in time. I think what one probably needs to take into account is that these measures were sort of mooted in previous budgets that the Minister of Finance had a year or two ago. So this almost, adds to the likelihood that those will come in, because it's not the first time we're hearing these recommendations. So, but in what form, it's difficult to say. So I would recommend that what you do is at least just, stay on top of what is happening. Maybe start looking at potential actions that can be taken given the current proposals, but not to do anything because you don't know what you would actually need to do. The Davis Tax Committee does recommend or suggest that they don't allow people to restructure their affairs, without tax consequences. So it's not as if they would allow us. At this stage, it looks like a period of time in which to regularize your affairs or change things without tax consequences. So that I think people, we would need to really lobby against that, to see that, if these measures do come in, there is an opportunity to plan, because it has a very negative impact on the net amount available to people, in terms of their estates. And yes, if you look at it, the majority of estate duty is only contributed by a small number of estates, being the most high value estates. And therefore, it's not just those people that are being impacted, but it would be probably the majority of the people would be the wealthier people. But, wealthy people also have families to look after and things like that. So it's not all tax planning, and one has to look at that. And besides the personal aspect, there are certain commercial issues which I won't go into now, but you can't really implement the measures in the way they propose now, because it'll have quite a dire effect on share schemes that involves trusts, BE transactions. So one has to be very careful. I don't think it'll come in the form it is currently proposed, but some aspects will probably come in. So planning right now is very difficult. Just pay attention to what's going on and stay on top of it, I would say.
Paying attention. Well, let's get a quick recap now of some of the key takeaways from tonight's discussion. Eugene, you've probably said it all already, but I take it this is probably the opportune time, like you said, for those consumers to make sure that they keep in touch with their financial advisors or tax planners, just to make sure that they are aware of what's happening. Yes,
that's right. There's no need to panic right now. Yes, there's areas of concern that these recommendations bring to the table. We need to take note of them, but planning is difficult. And I would say, there are many other aspects that could come through at the last end that we can't take into account now. So no need to panic right now. Stay on top of things. Sure. Thank you so much for your time. You've certainly educated us quite a bit on the potential changes that can come through to estate duties, together with the tax on trusts. But that's it for Personal Finance tonight. A big thank you once more to Eugene du Plessis, partner and head of tax at Grant Thornton Johannesburg. Get in touch with us via Twitter and send us your feedback at CNBC Africa, #Finance410, or to myself at Gugulethu. Until next time, take care, everyone.